Hello and welcome back, everyone, to a new episode here tonight on the Adam Hazara Show. Welcome to the finale of the Adam Hazara Show here on episode 32 at 7:01 p.m. here on Friday, June 13th, 2025. We're all the way this far to the end of a spring and the end of a sports season for a 25 year of sports for Lake Braddock. And we're going to wrap things up today with a Lake Braddock softball state quarterfinals recap. I know, sorry, in the title it says semifinals. It should be quarterfinals, so I beg your pardon for that. And also a little 2025 season recap for Lake Braddock softball, as well as looking towards what they will look like in 2026. So before we start the show today, make sure you guys, as always, leave a like, subscribe, and share a friend so you do not miss out on any other episodes. Also turn on notifications. And if this is the last episode, we might come back soon. We'll get more into that later on in the show. So without further ado, let's get it started here tonight on episode 32 of the Hazara Show. So, the Bruins softball season has finally come to an end. And that happened right on Tuesday over at James Madison High School over in Vienna. The Northern Region champions, who lost today to Western Branch in the state semifinals, 2-0. So Madison is out, Lake Braddock is out. Cheer Lake Braddock fans, as they're seeing that Madison is not going to be winning a state title this year. Soon to be Western Branch and Glen Allen from Yedo Fort in the state finals tomorrow afternoon. Best of luck to both teams. But anyway, so Lake Braddock, fortunately, lost that game 5-1. Not the prettiest loss, but not the worst loss to end this season. And we're going to start off with the positive. The positive is that they were able to pitch Mackenzie Verdejo the full game. And she gave it all she got. She finally was healthy enough to pitch through a full game again. Now, she was up in New Jersey for a travel tournament over weekend, but she rested all the way through that and did not play one part in any of those games in that tournament, resting up for this state quarterfinal game on Tuesday. That was on Tuesday, I should say. And she ended up going 7 innings. Now, she wasn't the best. Gave up 4 earned runs, 5 runs overall. One of them was unearned because of errors. But, and you kind of wonder, is it just, Madison was just too good of an offense for Mackenzie? I don't believe so. Or I just believe that, she was kind of coming off a bad knee. So it was kind of an unfortunate time where she pitched. But still, like I mentioned on past episodes in the show, despite whoever you put in that is not Verdejo for Bruins on the mound anytime this postseason, whether it's Sarah Allen, Olivia Federico, whoever it may be, no one beats Mackenzie Verdejo, even if she's pitching on a bad knee or bad whatever. That's because, that's because she still has much better stuff. She's still much better overall as a pitcher compared to anyone else in that bullpen or pitching staff as a whole. So, she didn't, so of course, she didn't do the best. And, the props, she gave it, all she could. It was great to see. Great for Bruins fans to see her, shove it out on the mound for one last time this season on Tuesday against a very good Madison team. And I felt like, Verdejo did her best. She kind of, she kept the Bruins in the game for a while. And, have that unearned run not scored, it would have been they only would have lost by 3. So technically speaking, have that run not scored on that unearned run, it still would have been a ball game. So Verdejo, in my opinion, did she didn't do the best job again, but she didn't do the worst job. The Bruins were still, relatively in the game. Well, as what the final score turned out to be, being 5-1 loss. So it was great to see her pitch. And another good thing is the Bruins scored their first run in a state quarterfinal game for the first time in 3 years since the 2022 state quarterfinals against the same Madison team at Madison. So that kind of leads us into kind of the bat. The Bruins offense was not consistent enough. And again, we talk about, the offensive season not being consistent enough with that bottom half. This year, and again, it still kind of showed. That, 1 through 5 is really what's been majority of Bruins offense this year. But again, 6 through 9, you've a lot of changes still for offense. Again, even throughout the postseason, as the Bruins have continued to try to find some good consistency, especially against the better pitching, and that's something that was again to be desired in that state quarterfinal game. The one run they scored was Emma Friedman coming off the bench and getting an RBI single. She doesn't get too many appearances, but a nice moment for her. Getting a hit, a very good hit up the middle in that game. Bruins only had 5 hits that entire game. And so now they end their season on a more worse note. That next year they're losing a very good senior class. And let me tell you, we'll get into that in a little bit, but outside of Freeman, none of those hitters, 6 through 9, had one hit in the lineup. None of them had one single hit. None of them walked once either. So again, it reared its ugly head. And I'll tell you, it's going to be interesting to see how the Bruins offense is next year. It kind of leads into the next part of negatives. We're going to kind of take a look at what the Bruins have next year, because you look at the senior class, this year. Maybe Bruin, Haley Hackbarth, Rada Samuel, all graduating. Now that's only 3 seniors right there. Not a very big class at all. But they're 3 seniors that are a big part of that 1 through 5 that carry the Bruins a lot through this season. And for the last, couple of years. More so Rada Samuel, who's been a 4-year starter, been all-district all 4 years. She was all-region this year. Haley Hackbarth was all-district twice. Mae Bruin was all-district this past season. So now you're going to have 3 holes to fill. And I'll tell you this right now, the only 2 solidified, hitters will be good in the lineup next year will be Verdejo and Addison Ford. Those 2 hitters you'll have no problem with. Those are really the only 2 hitters that in the lineup next year that to me seems like that are really going to be the backbone of the Bruins offense. It's going to really be a big question of who's going to step up for that Bruins team. Verdejo's had a breakout season offensively this year, hit, how many home runs? 8, 9 home runs? I forget the exact total, but something like that. And put up outstanding numbers. Ford, the D1 catcher committed to Fairfield, put up also really good numbers as well. But, there's a lot of volatility, in that 6 through 9. And a lot of that 6 through 9 is probably going to be starting full-time next year. And you're probably going to be seeing them bat, towards the top of the lineup, more middle. They're going to be even more pressured next year. Try to step up and hit, really hit consistently every day. It's going to be a big adjustment for a lot of the team. Now, of course, the bright side is of next year, they do bring back a lot. Looking at, some of the girls who got playing time this year, Eva Dubray. We'll break this down one by one. So first you have Eva Dubray, who, out of all the, underclassmen that they had this year, she was one who started the most games. I believe she started nearly every game this year. Now, she had some defensive struggles at third base. And so the Bruins kind of moved around to, designated player. And, I think they had her in the outfield a couple times, trying her out in different positions to try to alleviate some of the stress on her hitting, which had struggled a lot in the second half of the year. And so that you can try to focus more on her bat, that showed good signs. That's one of the better parts of her game this year is that she showed promise in her bat. And, you're hoping that she'll really improve that bat next year. And also, where do they, what's going to go on with her from a defensive aspect of things. Do they keep her at third base where she made a lot of errors? Do they put her do they put her somewhere in the corner outfield spot? Because I can tell you, her reactions, they're not good enough right now to play center field. Maybe left field where I think she was playing. Maybe right field is an option, or maybe another infield position. We'll see. Or they just put her at DP. If her defense is not going to be a big part of the game, if they want her back, she should. They could put her at DP. Where does she go? What's the situation with her and her defense? And some of the other Bruins that showed better offense. This year. We'll mention one. Sarah Allen, who was a freshman in left field, who pitched a little bit on the mound this year. She had a lot of innings in the playoffs and pitched in relief of when Mackenzie Verdejo was dealing with her bad knee throughout regionals and the district finals. And Allen showed some promise, and she showed some good stats and some limited plate appearances. I think she batted over 300. And she's going to be putting into a full-time starting position next year. Can she handle it? You have Olivia Federico, who had about an 800 OPS in about, maybe over 30 plate appearances. Where will she fit? She'll probably be at second base. You can kind of see, outside of Ford and Verdeo, where they're going to kind of fit. Allen got a lot of time in the left field. If they put her in right field, where they put her in the outfield. Federico may back at second base. They had Isabella Sevier, who had around an 800 OPS this year. Can she find more consistency in the bat? I know she's been more kind of free true outcome. Walk, strikeout, or a long hit, like a home run. Can she limit the strikeouts? Emma Friedman, who had the RBI single, is she going to start next year? There's a lot of questions for Bruins next year offensively, and really to see if, a lot of their players will improve. Of course, we'll see who's coming up in the rising freshman class of 2029. See if there's anyone there. See if their postseason calls now. Chappelle, Victoria Bradley are going to do anything next year. Be anything big for the Bruins. They still have Lauren Allen, who hasn't shown a lot of bright spots offensively, but maybe the Bruins are hoping could improve next year. So again, there's a lot of question marks with the team next year. Outside of the battery that's been around for 3 years now. So again, it'll be really interesting to see. And overall this season, you're hoping, that's a big part, that's 6 through 9. You're going to have to carry that into next year. How are they going to adjust to those other lineup spots and bigger roles? And Ford and Verdejo, Coach Claus and his staff going to do a great job leading that staff once again in a lineup. And you're going to have to see where all that will go. In terms of Bruins this year, the top out lineup was still good enough to win most of the district. They were still in a lot of games, despite the fact they couldn't beat West Springfield at all, in the 3 times they faced them, including one game in the district finals. They were still consistent, most of their games. They pretty much beat everyone that they needed to and that they were expected to, with all the stretches of being, this year, the district being down. Bruins won every game against all those bad district teams, and all those teams were down and were really seen as a challenge to Lake Braddock. And they still went out and beat a very good South County team a few times. It's still going to be very good next year alongside West Springfield. And the Bruins, despite some of their struggles that we've mentioned, they were still able to make it to the district finals. They were still able to make it to the region finals despite their side of the regional bracket being very weak compared, not having South County nor West Springfield. But one game where, but they were still able to make it, past region semis game where they were facing Hayfield and they only won 4-3, where they made a late comeback in, scored a couple unanswered runs, and Verdeo not pitching at all in that game. They were still able to win it. They nearly could have won the region finals. What you talk about, what if Verdeo was healthy? And, they probably would have, and, you're probably saying, well, they probably would have won if, if she wasn't hurt in that region final game. Yeah, I don't disagree. She probably would have. I think the Bruins would have very well won that game. And you also talk about the offense, again, this year being, not non-consistent in a States game. And I didn't really expect it to be. Again, with a bottom-out offense needs to do well. Everyone 1 through 9 has to contribute, especially against a very good Madison team that's always in it. And very good pitcher, Gian Atkins, did very well. So, another year goes by, Bruins don't hit offensively in the state tournament. It's gonna be questionable next year. I think there's Bruins. I'm pretty sure we're chosen by a lot to be favorites to still win versus district and region this year, with the fact that Verdeo's coming back. And again, the pitcher is going to be the backbone of that team. I feel like pitcher is the most important position in softball. It's like the quarterback in football, as we've explained here on a show in the past this spring. I still feel like next year, Verdeo is still going to make them competitive in a lot of games, especially if the same teams are down this year. If Robinson isn't going to improve, now I feel like that they could improve or bring back a lot next year, or bring back, their pitchers who've shown bright spots in the past. They could be better. We'll see if West Potomac has pitching next year. But, Fairfax, Alexandria City, and Woodson probably not going to be good next year again, like they always are. So, Verdeo, probably even against some of those better opponents like West Springfield, South County, probably still going to do well. She had struggled versus West Springfield. But, if she pitches out fully healthy, there'll be more of a chance that she can do well. She can pitch well. She's done it before. She can do it again. So I have no reason to say that she can't pitch against West Springfield at all. So, that'll be a question if they can get through West Springfield teams and South County teams that bring back a lot of talent next year. We'll kind of get back into who we're bringing to in just a few seconds here on the show. And, so overall, Bruins were consistent. So still another successful season. They still did very well overall. So, next year with a West Springfield team that's bringing back, like Andre Yagoy, winner promoted your D1 for baseman from Youngstown State. She's also come back on the mound too. They bring back great catcher Nellie Coughlin. They're bringing back great outfield led by Leo Mutin, Mia Lee, Jordan Frogel. There's Alexa Harvey on the infield too. They're bringing back a lot. South County, they lose Ava. They lose, Oksana Rodriguez. But they're still bringing back, a lot of their outfield. They bring back Kelsey Willis in the outfield. Connor Gregory's back in the infield. Bella Merck, Julia Niner, Peyton Tom are back on the infield. Catcher, they have Lauren Maroka coming back, who's D2. Maddie Grice is still back in the mound, who, in some games they can keep competitive. So they're still going to be up there towards the top of the standings next year. So, so we're still going to be up there. But, I kind of question, Bruins, with not as much established talent coming back, and, maybe West Springfield and South County having a bit more. I don't really know if I can really say that Lake Braddock is the best team going district, let alone the region next year. But overall, it's still, a very successful season. And, I'm pretty sure, at some point, hopefully Bruins can, I hope that the Bruins can figure something out next year. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this final episode of the Adam Zara Show for now. Hopefully we'll be back soon. Not sure if I will be back on a show again. I have to decide, if I'm going to continue the show or if there's going to be, the show's going to change a different direction and a topic, move away from Lake Braddock sports. You guys, please let me know. Let me know on X. Let me know in the comments what you guys might want to see. And, I just want to thank you guys so much for tuning in since November. It's been a great show. Great to host you guys all these shows over the last several months. It's been great covering Lake Braddock sports, guys. Great doing some Lake Braddock sports talk with you guys every single week. Thank you guys for tuning in to every show. Been running these 32 episodes since November. Overall, again, I've enjoyed a great time. I couldn't have made the show without you guys. And thank you guys so much. Hopefully I will see you guys again sometime. Bye-bye.